20 minutes after 10 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone, and you are tuned into News Talk 1310, KFK's Amy Oliver Show, and I'm talking with Rob Natelson, constitutional scholar from the Independence Institute. Rob, you had mentioned the necessary and proper clause as opposed to this being an argument, Obamacare being an argument under the Commerce Clause. We touched on this a little bit last week, but it bears repeating, and it bears repeating from you, somebody who has studied this and knows it inside and out. Why does Obamacare fall under necessary and proper?
Well, healthcare is not commerce. Congress receives the power the Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce among the several states, and the term commerce refers to trade among merchants and a few associated activities. One kind of insurance is included, that's cargo insurance, but generally speaking, that with one minor exception, that general concept of commerce has survived. When the U.S. Supreme Court uses the term commerce, they use it in this fairly narrow sense. But under modern Supreme Court doctrine, what the court has said is that Congress may also, under the necessary and proper clause, regulate economic activities that substantially affect interstate commerce. Economic activities that substantially affect interstate commerce. That would include the purchase of health care. That would include governance of manufacturing, governing agriculture, environmental laws, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that is not a proper interpretation of the necessary and proper clause. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the court is deciding these cases technically not under the Commerce Clause, but under the necessary and proper clause. Or if you prefer, if you want to be really technical about it, they're deciding it under the necessary and proper component of the commerce power. That's really what this dispute is about, is whether this law is necessary and proper to carry out the regulation of commerce.
Well, here's hoping that they look at it in the way you just described.
Well, I think they are looking at it that way, and the government essentially admitted that. The difficulty that the government faces, however, and the difficulty from the standpoint of, the real meaning of the Constitution, is that necessary and proper is simply not broad enough to include the individual mandate. In fact, to be honest, it's not broad enough to include healthcare regulations generally. The necessary and proper clause is in there to kind of it doesn't actually grant any power. It's in there to clarify to the reader that if there's some incidental stuff, minor subordinate stuff, that Congress has to do as part of regulating commerce, it can reach that. For example, Congress could pass a law saying that if you're going to sell goods across state lines, during the manufacturing process, you got to make sure they're properly labeled. I mean, that's what the necessary and proper clause is for. Little stuff like making sure the goods are properly labeled. It's not to allow the federal government to completely govern labor relations, manufactured health care, or whatever in the entire country.
Let me ask you something, because you just, based on that last statement, if there is, let's just say hypothetically, the Supreme Court comes down and says, under the necessary and proper clause, Obamacare is unconstitutional. Can we go back then and challenge other things that Congress has tried to do under the necessary and proper clause and roll back?
You can, but the decision probably is not going to help you that much. The Denver Post had a comment a few days ago, which I responded to in a letter to the editor that appeared on Friday, I think it was, in which they said that, gee, if Obamacare is struck down, that's going to it's going to dramatically change constitutional law. That's not true.
I'm not that lucky.
I'm sorry?
I'm not that lucky.
Yeah, right, you're not. If Obamacare is upheld, that will dramatically change constitutional law. But if it's struck down, we simply go back to the situation where the federal government can still govern the entire economy, but it just can't force you to buy stuff. I would hope that there would be some language. I wish there would be some language in the case which says something like, we really do think that some of our precedents might have gone too far, but they're not going to do that.
All right, tell us about the Medicaid brief, because that's something that hasn't gotten a lot of media attention.
It hasn't, and it's been a shame. The Obamacare law imposes certain requirements on states that participate in the Medicaid program, Medicaid being the state federal program for medical care for the poor. And by the way, it was adopted in 1965, and I just want to reassure you that before Medicaid was adopted, the states took care of the needs of their poor anyway. So we really didn't need Medicaid. But when it was adopted, you had the federal government offering all this free money. The states got locked into it, and today Medicaid is a huge, huge portion of every state's budget. So here you have these Medicaid mandates, which say to the states, you must expand your program in various ways. We'll cover some of the cost, but not all of the cost. You're going to have to cover some of the cost. And if you don't cooperate, you're going to lose 100% of your Medicaid dollars, or such lesser percentage as the bureaucrats in their uncontrolled discretion decide. Well, this is a horrible position to put a sovereign state in, and it violates a uniform series of court decisions going back to the founding, and it also violates many statements made at the founding about the dignity and the sovereignty of the states. So the Medicaid mandate, it's actually a clearer case for it being unconstitutional under the modern law than for the individual mandate. So, as you said, not very many people have been talking about this. Very few amicus briefs were being filed on it, if any. The parties were talking about it, but frankly not as well as they needed to. So, us rescuers at the Independence Institute decided to hop in with an amicus brief that explains how, or reminds the court of how the federal state system was set up, quotes many statements of the founders about the sovereignty of the states and their need not to be subject to federal coercion, and then discusses many of the court's own decisions, including decisions decided in the 2000s, in the 21st century, and including a great decision by Justice Kennedy, striking down federal laws that interfere too much with the sovereignty of the states. So I'm a little bit hopeful in that area that we might get the Medicaid mandate struck down. They actually, under the modern law, are more deserving of being struck down than the individual mandate.
If the Medicaid mandate, first of all, do you have a dollar amount on what that would cost, or is it just one of these things where we don't even really know how much it's going to cost, but we do know it's going to be a financial hardship, so much so it's going to be impossible to pay for it?
It could drive states into bankruptcy. You're talking anywhere from 10 to 40% of the budgets of states.
Wow.
And any state that has its Medicaid funds yanked are going to have to set up their own health care for the poor. So if Colorado, for example, says these mandates are unacceptable, we will want to withdraw from Medicaid, then not only is the federal government going to be imposing taxes on us, including these new taxes under Obamacare, they're going to be sending the money to other states, denying it to Colorado, and then Colorado's going to have to raise taxes to finance its own program. Now, it's quite a scenario.
That should be illegal.
Well, it is. It's what it has been called again and again by the Supreme Court coercion. Yeah. And coercion by the federal governments against the states is not permitted. Now, I will concede that to a certain extent, the states lulled into this problem. But that doesn't mean that because other state officials made a mistake 45 years ago, that that the people of the state should be bankrupted today. Really important to note here, Amy, in 1992, in an opinion by Justice O'Connor, that the Supreme Court eloquently pointed out that the sovereignty of the states, to protect the dignity of the states in the federal system, is not for the benefit of the states, and it's not for the benefit of state officials. It's for the benefit of individual liberties, for the benefit of individual citizens. And so the fact that state officials made a bad decision 45 years ago by getting into this program is not a reason for depriving the citizens of liberty today, and it's certainly not a reason for bankrupting the taxpayers and state governments 45 years later.
We have to take a quick break, but coming back, Rob, I'd like you to address President Barack Obama's statements yesterday.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Regarding the Supreme Court. He isn't the first president who has been less than pleased with the Supreme Court. And we can talk about that as well, but I'd love to get your take on what President Barack Obama said about the Supreme Court yesterday. I'm talking with constitutional scholar Rob Natelson, and we will continue it. We do this once a month with Rob. Fortunate enough to have him on the show today. But right now, we've got to get a news and weather update, then more of the Amy Oliver Show.